Throughout rural Chhattisgarh, the landscape is dotted with these simple stone boundary bridges built to span the local river systems. On the dirt pathways leading up to the water, travelers frequently encounter a dense scattering of broken glass bangles, vermilion powder, and small tied bundles known as totcase. These objects represent a localized system of tolls. Locals leave these offerings as a deliberate appeasement, believing them necessary for anyone hoping to cross the water safely after the sun goes down. The offerings are intended for a specific territorial entity, the Pulia Kibutni, or the bridge ghost. This tradition is rooted in a communal fear that traces back to 1996 and a documented near-fatal encounter involving a young man named Santosh. The entity's history begins with a woman who once lived in a small hut right beside the bridge. Her life ended when a sudden, violent flood swept the entire structure into the river. Her body was never recovered, and the local belief is that she died convinced the village had intentionally released the floodwaters to kill her. This perceived betrayal drives her to target a specific demographic: young newlywed men, solitary nighttime travelers, and those with lowered inhibitions returning home late at night. She maintains a targeted vendetta, focusing her malice on the very types of people she believes should have protected or remembered her. In 1996, Santosh was a newly married farmer and a staunch skeptic of these local ghost stories. His skepticism was tested one night after he consumed a heavy amount of mahua, a potent locally brewed liquor, while out with friends from a neighboring village. To reach his home in the dead of night, he had to navigate his bicycle across the unbarriered boundary bridge entirely alone. Between his recent marriage, his intoxication, and his isolation, Santosh had inadvertently met every requirement for the entity's predatory profile. As he reached the treacherous, dark edge of the bridge, Santosh dismounted his bicycle, hoping to maintain his balance on the narrow path. He suddenly spotted a woman in a white sari standing at the bridge's edge. She stood perfectly still, mirroring his every move, stepping back when he stepped forward. In his drunken state, Santosh grew angry. He repeatedly shouted and cursed at the figure, demanding she get out of his way. When he lunged toward her, the woman suddenly shifted to the far side of the bridge with an unnatural, blurring speed. The wind caught the woman's veil, blowing it back to reveal a fleshless, bone-white skull with empty eye sockets. Santosh fled on his bicycle, frantically pedaling through the dark dirt paths as fast as his body would allow, feeling the entity hovering inches behind him for the entire journey. He reached his home and collapsed into bed, but while his body had crossed the threshold, his spiritual defense had already been breached. By morning, Santosh was found burning with a severe fever. His body was completely rigid, and he began seizing, appearing as though the blood had been drained from his skin. When standard religious items failed to wake him, his family urgently summoned a local tantric. The tantric identified the symptoms as a full-scale spiritual possession, announcing that only a ritual sacrifice of blood and lemons could break the entity's hold. During a second ritual fire, the entity took full control of Santosh's body. He screamed about his own death before his body went into convulsions, vomiting up physical objects like talismans, nails, and teeth. These violent physical symptoms were the direct result of the entity losing its parasitical grip on his body during the exorcism. The tantric later questioned how Santosh survived the initial encounter, given how vulnerable and isolated he was on the bridge. The explanation was found in Santosh's pockets. Because he was intoxicated, he had accidentally worn his wedding clothes, which still contained small iron knives, matches, and protective yantras sewn in by his family. Local tradition suggests that these iron objects interact with a person's chaya, or aura, to create a protective barrier. This deflection field prevented the entity from immediately stopping Santosh's heart on the bridge, allowing him to survive long enough to reach his family. To finish the cleansing, Santosh's father carried the vomited debris to the river. He cast the pot into the water and returned home without looking back, despite hearing voices from the river calling out for justice. Today, those scattered bangles and powders on the bridge serve a specific purpose. They are the protocols used by locals to manage the risks of the crossing. In rural Chhattisgarh, These stories function as a localized manual for navigating the specific dangers of the dark.